Crystal chandeliers reflected candlelight like mocking stars above. Silverware clinked in cruel, steady rhythm. Isabella Blaire, 28, sat frozen at the VIP table. Her hands trembled despite her perfect posture. "Wrong table, sweetheart." The businessman's laughter sliced through the air. Phone cameras flashed brightly, whispers built into towering walls of judgment. The kitchen door opened slowly. A man in worn but clean suit stepped forward, Michael Rowe, 34, moving with quiet determination. He placed one steady hand on her chair, 2 words, calm and final: "She's with me." Complete silence. Isabella's wine glass suspended midair. The room held its breath. Everything changed forever. Michael Rowe had the kind of face that told stories without words. European features weathered by honest work. Short brown hair that refused to stay perfectly styled, and eyes that held depths most people never bothered to explore. At 34, he carried himself like a man who had learned that actions mattered more than appearances. His days started before dawn. 2 jobs kept food on the table and a roof over his daughter's head. Mornings at the auto garage. Evenings fixing air conditioners and cleaning warehouses. Every dollar earned, every hour worked, all for 7-year-old Ellie. The photo on his kitchen shelf told the story he couldn't speak aloud. A young woman with kind eyes smiled back at him from a cracked wooden frame. His wife, lost during a complicated delivery that saved their daughter but took everything else. The frame stayed crooked no matter how often he straightened it, as if grief itself had shifted the world off its axis. His mornings followed a sacred rhythm. Drive Ellie to school in their aging sedan, watch her small backpack disappear through the school doors, then head to work with the radio playing soft jazz. Evenings meant homemade soup, bedtime stories, and the gentle weight of his daughter's trust in his arms. Michael believed in quiet kindness. He picked up dropped coats, held doors for strangers, gave up parking spots to elderly shoppers. Good deeds performed without audience, without expectation of return. Isabella Blaire lived in a different universe entirely. Beautiful in the way that magazine covers demanded, with long chestnut hair and features that photographers fought to capture. But beauty, she had learned, could be its own prison. The evening that would change everything started like so many others, trapped at a business dinner orchestrated by her father's associates. Men who mistook politeness for permission, who saw her trust fund before they saw her humanity. "Daddy's little princess sitting all alone?" The comment sparked laughter around the table like gasoline thrown on fire. Isabella's fingers tightened around her napkin. She had endured worse, but tonight felt different. Tonight the walls seemed closer, the laughter sharper, the escape routes fewer. Michael hadn't planned to be there. An emergency air conditioning repair in the restaurant's kitchen had brought him through the back entrance. The sound of cruel laughter drifted from the dining room, and something in its tone made him pause. Through the service window he saw her, a young woman surrounded by predatory smiles, her composure cracking like ice under pressure. He didn't know her story, her name, or her circumstances. He only knew that no one deserved to sit alone in a crowd of wolves. The walk from kitchen to dining room took 15 seconds. 15 seconds to cross the space between 2 worlds, to step from shadows into spotlights, to place himself between cruelty and its target. "She's with me." 2 words. Simple, unshakable, final. The restaurant manager appeared immediately, apologetic and confused, offering them a private table. No one argued. The authority in Michael's voice left no room for debate, but the stares followed them anyway, hungry and calculating. At their new table, Isabella's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Why did you help me?" Michael's answer was equally quiet. "Because nobody deserves to be treated like that." Later, the waitress would tell her co-workers. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make a scene. He just claimed her, protected her. I've never seen anyone shield a stranger like that, so calm and sure, like it was the most natural thing in the world. The rescue was complete, but the story, their story, was just beginning. They left through the restaurant side exit, stepping into cool night air that felt like freedom after the suffocating dining room. Isabella hugged her arms against the chill, and without a word, Michael slipped off his jacket and draped it around her shoulders. The coffee shop across the street glowed with warm light, still open despite the late hour. They chose a corner table, away from windows, away from curious eyes. 2 steaming cups sat between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. "In my world," Isabella began, her voice carrying years of accumulated hurt, "people apologize with expensive gifts and business contracts. I feel like a museum piece, something beautiful to display, but not quite real enough to touch." Michael stirred his coffee slowly, considering. "What would you rather have instead?" The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked what she wanted, only what she represented, what she was worth, what she could provide. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've never been asked." Michael told her about Ellie, about bedtime stories and scraped knees, about a 7-year-old who drew sunshine on scraps of paper and hid them in his lunchbox so Daddy won't be sad at work. "She's afraid of thunderstorms," he said, his voice softening. "But she'll stand at the window during lightning, counting the seconds between flash and thunder. Says she's being brave for both of us." Isabella watched the foam art in her cappuccino slowly dissolve, swirling patterns that reminded her of the chaos inside her chest. Here was a man who spoke of love without conditions, protection without ownership. Her phone buzzed. A text from her father. "Corporate dinner in 30 minutes. Don't embarrass the family." She turned the screen face down. "Nobody has the right to turn you into a prop," Michael said quietly. His certainty was a life raft in an ocean of expectations. The next morning, Isabella found herself standing outside Michael's garage, holding a box of homemade cookies that had taken her 3 attempts to get right. She'd never baked before. The kitchen staff usually handled such things, but something about the imperfection felt honest. Ellie appeared from behind a toolbox, shy at first, then brightening when she saw the heart-shaped cookies that had crumbled at the edges. They sat on the front steps sharing cookies and milk cartons. 3 people who shouldn't have fit together but somehow did. Isabella heard laughter, real laughter, for the first time in months. Days blended into a routine she never expected to crave. Isabella helped organize Michael's customer files, her neat handwriting replacing his hurried scrawl. She discovered satisfaction in small tasks, in systems that actually help people instead of extracting profit from them. Evenings found her reading bedtime stories to Ellie while Michael fixed the flickering lamp in the corner. The domesticity felt foreign and wonderful, like learning to speak a language she'd always wanted to understand. One evening, Ellie handed Isabella a drawing, 3 figures standing in a garden with a large sun smiling down from the corner. "This is for you," Ellie whispered, "so you won't be in the dark anymore." Isabella wanted to reciprocate their kindness. She invited them to a charity gala. "Just to say thank you," she insisted, though Michael's reluctance was obvious. "It's not really our scene," he said carefully. But Ellie's eyes lit up at the mention of fireworks, and Michael's resistance crumbled in the face of his daughter's excitement. The gala was everything Isabella had warned them it would be. Crystalline laughter that meant nothing, conversations that circled around money like vultures around roadkill. Michael moved through it all with quiet dignity, unimpressed by the displays of wealth that were meant to intimidate. A gossip photographer snapped pictures from the shadows, Billionaire Heiress slumming with the help. Isabella's temper flared, but Michael's hand on her arm stopped her response. "Let them talk," he said simply. "You don't owe anyone explanations." When the fireworks began, they found a quiet corner of the rooftop terrace. Ellie pressed against the railing, her face reflecting the colored lights bursting overhead. For a moment, the 3 of them existed in their own bubble, untouchable by judgment or expectation. But cameras had captured it all. The quiet intimacy, the genuine smiles, the way Isabella looked at Michael like he had single-handedly rearranged the stars. By morning, those photographs would change everything. The next day, Ellie would tell her teacher. Isabella fixed my hair ribbon with a piece of pretty cloth she tore from her dress. She said being beautiful was about having enough, not having everything. I think she's like the sunshine in my drawings. She makes everything brighter just by being there. In her innocent way, Ellie had captured something the adults were still learning to name. Isabella wasn't just visiting their world, she was becoming part of it, finding pieces of herself she never knew existed in the spaces between Michael's quiet strength and Ellie's uncomplicated love. But the real world was about to come crashing back into their carefully constructed piece, bringing with it consequences that would test everything they had built together. The headlines hit like a sledgehammer at dawn. Heiress dating a mechanic? The words flashed across every gossip site, every social media feed, every screen in the city that thrived on scandal. By 8 a.m., the emergency board meeting at Blaire Corporation was already underway. Isabella's father sat at the head of the mahogany table, flanked by advisors who looked like they'd been carved from the same expensive stone. And there, in a chair that might as well have been a throne, sat Richard Ashford, the man her family had chosen as her future husband. They arrived at the garage like a conquering army, Italian leather shoes clicking against concrete, briefcases swinging like weapons, faces set in expressions of barely controlled disgust. The assault began immediately. "You don't belong in our world," her father's lead advisor announced, his voice dripping with the kind of condescension that money could buy. "Don't drag Isabella down to your level." Michael stood behind his workbench, grease stains on his hands, dignity wrapped around his shoulders like armor. "I've never dragged anyone down," he replied evenly. "I'm teaching my daughter to respect people regardless of their bank account." Richard Ashford stepped forward, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. He placed a check on the workbench, enough money to change Michael's life, to solve every financial worry, to buy his silence in his absence. "Consider this a retirement fund," Richard said smoothly. "Walk away, and everyone wins." Ellie appeared from behind a stack of tires, clutching her teddy bear tighter as she sensed the tension crackling through the air like electricity before a storm. That's when Isabella burst through the garage door, her face pale with fury and something that looked like fear. "Stop!" she commanded, her voice cutting through the morning air. She turned to face her father, and for the first time in her life, her spine was steel. "I choose my own life." The corporate delegation had come prepared for war. They spread photographs across the workbench, images from the gala, tabloid headlines, social media screenshots that painted Isabella as a naive girl playing at rebellion. "This is what your little romance has cost us," her father said coldly. "Stock prices dropping, merger deals falling through. Our reputation—" "Your reputation," Isabella interrupted. "Not mine, not who I actually am." Richard's patience snapped like a rubber band stretched too far. "What could this mechanic possibly offer someone like you?" It was the wrong question to ask in front of the wrong man. Michael didn't raise his voice. He simply opened a drawer and pulled out a wooden box worn smooth by years of handling. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, lay a military commendation medal and a yellowed newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Air Force Technician Saves Squadron from Fuel Explosion." "This mechanic," Michael said quietly, "used to be Staff Sergeant Michael Rowe, lead aviation technician. 3 years ago, during a routine maintenance check, the fuel depot caught fire. The automatic shutoff systems failed. I had 60 seconds to manually close the valves before the entire base went up in flames." He held up the medal, letting the morning light catch its worn surface. "I could have run, should have run. Instead, I stayed and turned off the gas lines while fire licked at my heels. Saved 200 people that night, including a squadron preparing for deployment." The garage had gone silent except for the distant hum of traffic. After the incident, they offered me promotions, medals, a career that would have made me wealthy. But my wife had just died, and Ellie was 6 months old. I chose to resign and take care of my daughter instead of chasing glory. An older man stepped forward from the back of the corporate group, a retired general who had been silent until now. His face had gone pale with recognition. "Sergeant Rowe, the general said, standing straighter. I owe you the lives of 12 men in my squadron that night. You saved my boys. The power dynamic in the room shifted like tectonic plates rearranging themselves. Richard's smug expression crumbled. Isabella's father looked like he'd swallowed something sour. The advisors suddenly found their shoes very interesting, but Isabella's father wasn't finished. Corporate dynasties don't surrender easily. Even so, he said, his voice tight with control, my daughter's future belongs to me. Isabella cut him off. For the first time in her life, she spoke with the authority of someone who had finally found her voice. She pulled the engagement ring from her finger, a diamond the size of a small planet, and set it on the workbench next to the check. I don't need a future that doesn't include my choice in it. The delegation began to withdraw, their mission a failure. As they reached the door, the retired general stopped and placed a weathered hand on Michael's shoulder. Son, he said quietly, the brightest stars aren't always the ones that shine the loudest. Sometimes they're the ones that light the way home. After they left, Isabella knelt beside Ellie, who had watched the entire confrontation with wide, worried eyes. I'm sorry you had to see that, Isabella whispered. Ellie shook her head solemnly. You stood very straight, she said, like Daddy does when he's being brave. Michael looked at Isabella, not with promises of forever, not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, just with a simple nod that said, you chose yourself. That takes real courage. The battle was over, but the real test was just beginning. Isabella had burned bridges, shattered expectations, and stepped away from everything she'd ever known. Now she had to figure out who she was when nobody was watching, when there were no cameras to perform for, no expectations to meet or exceed. She had chosen freedom, but freedom came with its own price and its own rewards. Isabella moved out of the family estate on a Tuesday morning, carrying nothing but 2 suitcases and a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. Michael and Ellie's small house became her temporary refuge, a place to breathe without the weight of a legacy pressing down on her shoulders. Learning to live simply proved harder than expected. Isabella had never made her own bed, never worried about grocery budgets, never discovered the satisfaction of folding laundry while listening to afternoon radio. Each small task felt like a minor victory over a lifetime of having everything done for her. The back garden had been neglected for months, weeds choking out the flower beds, soil hard and unwelcoming, but something about its wild state called to her. Here was a project with no shareholders, no profit margins, no ulterior motives, just dirt and seeds and the faith that something beautiful could grow. We could plant lavender, she suggested one morning, kneeling beside a cleared patch of earth. And maybe some sunflowers for Ellie. Michael worked beside her, his hands sure and steady as they turned the soil. Sunflowers need a lot of space to grow, he said, but they're worth it when they bloom. Ellie bounced between them like a small, enthusiastic butterfly, her hands black with earth, her face glowing with the joy of creation. For a 7-year-old, there was no difference between playing in dirt and changing the world. Both were equally magical. The garden became their shared obsession. Early mornings found them kneeling in the soil, planting seeds with the reverence of people who had learned that growing things required both patience and faith. Isabella discovered muscles she'd never used, calluses that felt like badges of honor, and a kind of tiredness that came from honest work instead of emotional exhaustion. Michael repaired the front porch light and hung wind chimes from the eaves, delicate metal tubes that caught the breeze and sang soft melodies that replaced the constant noise of city traffic. The sound became the soundtrack of their new normal. Isabella brought her business skills to the garage, but in ways she'd never imagined using them. She created appointment systems, followed up with customers, organized financial records with the precision of someone who understood numbers, but had never used them to help rather than exploit. Monthly revenue increased steadily, not because they were charging more, but because customers trusted a business that treated them with respect and delivered what it promised. Evening dinners became sacred time, Three people around a small wooden table, sharing soup and stories in the comfortable silences that meant more than conversation. Isabella talked about the loneliness of growing up rich. Ellie shared playground politics and spelling test victories. Michael mostly listened, adding hot water to bowls and gentle questions that drew out more than they demanded. One rainy evening, as they sat around the table with steaming bowls of vegetable soup, Ellie made an announcement that stopped all conversation. "Are you two going to get married?" The question hung in the air like incense, sweet and heavy and impossible to ignore. Isabella felt heat rise in her cheeks. Michael set down his spoon carefully, as if any sudden movement might shatter something precious. "Marriage isn't something you rush into," he said finally, his voice gentle but certain. "If someone isn't ready, you wait. And that's okay." Isabella met his eyes across the table, seeing patience there instead of pressure, understanding instead of expectation. Here was a man who would wait for her to heal, to grow, to become whoever she was meant to be without the weight of family expectations or social pressure. "What if we're still figuring things out?" she asked. "Then we figure them out together," he replied simply. The first flowers bloomed on a Thursday morning in late spring. Isabella discovered them while hanging laundry on the line. Tiny purple lavender buds that had pushed through the soil like hope made visible. She called Ellie over, and together they knelt beside the small miracle, breathing in the faint, sweet scent that promised more to come. "We did this," Ellie whispered, her voice full of wonder. "We made something beautiful." That afternoon, Ellie presented Isabella with a new drawing. 3 figures standing in a garden full of flowers, the sun larger and brighter than in any of her previous artwork. At the bottom, in careful 7-year-old handwriting, she had written, "My family." Isabella studied the drawing, noting how Ellie had drawn them all the same size, how the sun seemed to embrace all 3 figures instead of shining down from a distance. "Can I hang this on the refrigerator?" Isabella asked. Ellie nodded solemnly, understanding instinctively that this was about more than decoration. It was about belonging, about being claimed and claiming in return. That evening, as Isabella tucked Ellie into bed, the little girl asked one more question. "Will you stay with us?" Isabella smoothed the covers and kissed Ellie's forehead, tasting the sweetness of being chosen by someone who asked for nothing but presence in return. "If you'll have me," she whispered back. "Forever and always," Ellie replied, already half asleep. Standing in the doorway, Isabella realized that she had found something she hadn't even known she was looking for. A place where love wasn't transactional, where worth wasn't measured in dollars or achievements, where home was built one ordinary, beautiful day at a time. Dawn arrived softly, painting the kitchen walls gold as sunlight filtered through handmade curtains. The scent of baking bread drifted through the house. Isabella's third attempt at Michael's mother's recipe, finally successful after weeks of practice. She opened the cabinet to reach for plates and stopped. There, side by side, sat Michael's wooden box of military honors and one of Ellie's sunshine drawings taped to the inside of the door. 2 symbols from different worlds, living in peaceful coexistence. Through the window, she watched Michael kneeling on the front step, patiently tying Ellie's shoelaces while she chattered about her upcoming art show at school. His movements held the practiced grace of a father who had performed this ritual 1,000 times, who would perform it 1,000 more without complaint. Something shifted in Isabella's chest, a recognition so profound it took her breath away. She had spent 28 years searching for her place in the world, never realizing that belonging wasn't about finding the right stage. It was about finding the right audience. People who saw her not as an heiress or a trophy or a business asset, but simply as Isabella. She stepped outside, morning air cool against her skin, and walked to the back garden where their flowers were beginning to bloom. The lavender had grown tall and fragrant, purple spikes swaying in the gentle breeze. The sunflowers were still small, but their faces already turned toward the light with unwavering faith. Everything they had planted together was thriving. proof that some things grew better when tended with love instead of expectation. Isabella touched one of the lavender stems, feeling its strength, breathing in its sweetness. This garden was their creation, their shared faith made visible. She had helped these flowers grow from nothing, just as Michael and Ellie had helped her bloom into someone she barely recognized. Someone stronger, gentler, more real than the person who had sat trembling in that restaurant months ago. She turned back toward the house, where Michael was now braiding Ellie's hair, while she held a piece of toast in one hand and a drawing in the other. Ordinary moments that felt extraordinary because they were chosen, not assigned. Isabella walked through the kitchen door and said the words that had been growing in her heart like seeds waiting for the right season. "If you two still need me, I'd like to stay." Michael looked up from Ellie's braid, his hands stilling for just a moment. No dramatic declarations, no promises of forever that might break under pressure. Just that steady smile that had first drawn her to him, warm and real and certain. "Welcome home," he said simply. Ellie launched herself into Isabella's arms with the enthusiasm of someone who had never learned to doubt love when it was offered freely. "Can we make the sun in my drawings even bigger now?" she asked, her voice muffled against Isabella's shoulder. "As big as you want it," Isabella whispered back, holding tight to this child who had taught her that family wasn't about blood or obligation, but about showing up day after day with open hearts and willing hands. Later, as they walked to school together, Michael carrying Ellie's backpack, Isabella holding her small hand, all three of them moving in the comfortable rhythm of people who belong together, Isabella understood finally what she had been searching for all her life. Not the spotlight, not the stage, not the applause of strangers. Just this, the simple, profound miracle of being known, being chosen, being home. The morning sun painted everything golden, and Isabella smiled, thinking of Ellie's drawings where the sun always had a face, always looked happy, always shone on everyone equally. Some stories end with fireworks and grand gestures. Others end with braided hair and homemade bread and the quiet certainty that tomorrow would bring another chance to choose love, to choose presence, to choose each other. This was the better ending. If you believe that sometimes two simple words can change an entire life, comment below, "I believe." And if stories like this one, quiet, persistent, real, deserve to be preserved, subscribe to hear more journeys that touch the heart without breaking it.